if we go back 10 years ago or 15 years ago, UI UX design wasn't something that was common or even appreciated in the field of tech. But then it became popularized by companies like Apple that realized that what like something that would make users use their product more is when they are put front and center of the experience.
All right, great. So glad to have you. Can you tell us more about yourself and your just like your experience in the tech industry?
First of all, thanks for having me here. My name is Grace Mary, and I'm a product designer. I'm currently based here in Toronto, Canada. I have over 3+ years experience in the field of product design, and I have been opportune to work both on the agency side, and right now I work as an in-house designer in one of I'll say a mid-sized tech company based out of Toronto here. And in terms of like what my experience and whatnot, I feel like I don't want to go into that because as we have this conversation, that will naturally unfold. So we can get into that kind of like later on in the conversation.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I know you mentioned that you're a product designer, which is super cool. And but I'm wondering if, for people who don't know what a product designer does, I know you talk a lot about like UX and UI. Can you give us some like clarification on what that is, how it's different or the same or whatever?
So I kind of like using this analogy of or illustration of the German doll. The German doll is a Chinese looking doll, in my opinion, that has multiple smaller dolls within it. And it's kind of like product design is the biggest sphere, and then UI UX kind of falls under product design. So they are very interconnected, but you can be a product designer on both digital interfaces and non-digital interfaces. But of course, right now we're talking about digital interfaces, so it kind of ladders down to being UI UX design. I hope I did not confuse us more than I helped, but yeah.
No, that makes sense. So you're saying that it's kind of like those German Russian dolls, um, where it's like something is inside of another thing is inside of another thing. Or another way that we can also explain it, because I also like this analogy, is kind of like saying a country and a city. So if it's like Nigeria and Lagos, or like Canada and Toronto. So UX UI is Toronto, which is within Canada, or it's Lagos within Nigeria. So that's super cool. I really like that. Yeah, I love that. So I see that you teach a lot about UX. You teach a lot about UI and like skills and about like resources and stuff like that. So what inspired you to start teaching this?
That's a question that I love answering because it's something that I've had conversations with people about previously. And I would say that my first intention was never to actually, was not necessarily to teach about the field of UI UX design. So I think it was in during the COVID era. I I was a fashion designer, so I said that we're going to talk about that, right? So before I became a product designer, I was a fashion designer for over 7 years. I owned my small business, and I had a lot of people, friends, and also kind of acquaintances asking me questions about what I knew. I felt like those things were common knowledge. So when people would ask me, I'm like, huh, you don't know that? Not in a like I'm better than you way. It was more like it just kind of illuminate. There was some sort of illumination, like Grace, you have information to share that will be helpful to people. And fast forward to a couple of years later when I started UX design, it was the same thing. I had people asking me questions. I had new information that I learned. I'm like, I should share this. People should know this. Why is no one talking about this? So, which is why I basically then pivoted from talking about fashion design, which was like my initial love, to talking more about product design. So, yeah.
Wow, that's so cool. And isn't it funny? It's so hard to realize that people don't know what you know. Like it's like everyone has like this different life experience and you're like this is so simple. You don't know it. And it's not about putting people down, but I get
Exactly.
that experience sometimes when it comes to like technology or when it comes to parenting things, and that's why I just love to share resources with people. So that's awesome. Um So yes, you pivoted from one kind of design to a different kind of design, and this is in a tech industry. And a lot of parents are thinking about getting their kids in tech, and they're like, "Oh, you need to learn coding, you need to learn programming." But what I really like is that yes, it's good to know a bit of coding and stuff in UI UX, but not necessarily. At least that's my understanding. So can you tell us a little bit about UI UX design and why it's important in the tech industry?
Um, out, I think for the case, especially since this is kind of like introduction to UI UX design, I'll be using a lot of analogies, right? So think about a digital product. So a lot of people use Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. Those are really common digital products that a UI UX designer might be involved in making. And when we talk about like the product life cycle, you have the engineers, so the people who code, and then you have the designers, the people who work on for to make it very simplistic, I'll say the visuals of a product. And you have the PMs, which are the people who would think about how would this product make money for the company. They come together to build that product, the product that is pleasurable for the user, profitable for the company, and also technically feasible because there are also codes or would say tech packs that a company use and might have limitations due to X and Y reasons. And so currently, like if we go back 10 years ago or 15 years ago, UI UX design wasn't something that was common or even appreciated in the field of tech. But then it became popularized by companies like Apple that realized that something that would make users use their product more is when they are put front and center of the experience. And that's basically what a product designer does, right? We or UI UX designer does. We would actually look at the product. Maybe it's a brand new product, like, okay, you want to develop this idea by looking at what is the pain point of the user. How can we then solve that pain point using a solution? So it can be, in this case, we want it to be a digital solution. So it could be an app, it could be a web app, it could be a mobile app, it could be a website. So whatever the case may be. So I would say that UI UX design is important in the tech industries because people who use these products that are created by these tech companies are human beings and they have needs that would need to be met. And when interesting thing about it is that when a product solves the problem or the pain point of a user, they'll use it more for sure, right? And that makes the company revenue. So everybody's happy. So it's not kind of going extinct anytime soon. So yeah.
That makes so much sense. That makes a lot of sense. So, what are some of the key skills and qualities that would make someone who's interested in this kind of design, UI, UX, or product design? What are some qualities and skills that you think will help them to be successful?
Yeah, I think one thing that I would mention is that product design is a multidisciplinary field. Basically, whatever you know in or you do on a day-to-day basis. So for example, whether it's communication, whether it's problem solving, whether it's critical thinking, those things would form a foundation for whatever skill you need to start your UI UX design career, right? And so the first major thing that I can call out would be creative problem solving, because UI UX design requires a bit of I'll say logical thinking, so analytical skills, but also you need to then solve that problem using a digital platform. And in most cases, those platforms they are usually visual. So you need to actually be able to solve problems creatively. And also within kind of digging deeper down into the creative problem solving, most times we have what we call constraints in design. So a company might have a grand idea, but they probably might not have the resources to execute it. So you're saying within this constraint, how do I solve the problem? Which is why you need to be creative with your problem solving. And the next one is, I think a lot of people say this, empathy. Empathy for the people who you're creating this product for, if you're unable to put yourself in their shoes, then it might be tough for you to actually create solutions or solve create solutions that solve their problem. So imagine that I am someone who has never lived in Africa before or in Nigeria before, and I'm saying one of the major problems that users have in Nigeria is that they're unable to know, say for example, when there's going to be a power cut, and I'm like, with it because I live on the other side of the world where it's not a thing, right? So it's kind of like, okay, how would a user feel if this is the problem that they have, and how can I solve it in a way that it's not just solve the problem for the users, but it's also pleasurable. So that's kind of like adding the delight factor into the overall experience. So that's why empathy is also important. And then there's also the portion of advocacy, right? You have within the organization you work, you have people who, like, you have product managers who are keen on pushing their metrics, pushing the numbers. And sometimes in the bid to do that, they might ignore the user. So your role as a product designer or UI UX designer is then to then say, advocate for the users, like, oh, this is important to the users, but also balancing it with what the company goals might be, well, how can we create a middle ground between making profit, but also ensuring that while we make profits, we solve the problem, or even maybe solving the higher stake problems for the users. And by doing so, it might increase profitability for the company. And then, oops.
It's okay.
Yeah. And then I would say communication. There are a lot more. There are a few more that I can call out, but I'm just kind of end on communication. Communication is important because you're going to be working with a lot of stakeholders. So whether you're an in-house designer or maybe you're working in an agency, in the agency you have to talk to, say, the brand designer or the end clients, right? Within an in-house setup, you need to talk to your PMs, your engineers, and whatnot. So communication is very important. So you should be able to clearly communicate your intentions and also kind of keep that line of communication open. So I'd say those are some of the skill sets or qualities required to actually start out. But there are a lot more. And if you kind of go into Google and put like, what are some of the qualities that I need to excel as a UI designer, you'll find it there.
Wow, that sounds like just like great life skills, empathy, communication, problem solving. So I think that's such a great thing. I'm glad that you also broke it down that way. So yeah, very, very cool. You talked a little bit about digital platforms like Instagram. Can you share an example of where someone like you, if you were a product designer for this digital platform, how you would be involved in that process? Is it, I mean, I know there are so many different aspects of designing the product, but can you share some examples for us?
Okay, awesome. So let's take Instagram as an example. So within an organization like Instagram, they might have different teams. And let's say you are part of the team that is responsible for surfacing content. Basically, the team that surfaces content are basically determining where you see the post that you actually users post on Instagram. So as a user, when you post your stories or you post your reels, how do other people view it? And a problem might be that let's say that from the metrics, because we use a lot of numbers, UI UX design is data driven as well. So maybe we went to our Google Analytics or dashboards and we found out that a lot of users are not seeing content on Reels. And we're like, okay, why are people not seeing that? So we investigate that a little bit further to understand why are users not seeing this? Like, what is the problem? Is it a problem of us surfacing better? Is there a logic to how we can match content that users might be interested in with them, right? So users and their interests, how do we match them? So those are kind of part of the conversations that might go on at the back end. And then it comes up to say, okay, this is something we really we want to do as a product team. And then the product designer or the UI UX designer picks it up in the sense that they are saying, okay, I'm going to figure out how these videos can be shown to other people in a way that makes it more engaging, or in the way that makes them more engaged on the platform. So that's why you see that a lot of times Instagram, they run a lot of tests. So you would see a feature today that they might actually deprecate after a few weeks or months because maybe that experiment failed. So that's basically what we do. We'll go into Figma. We use the design tool called Figma or Adobe XD. Those are the two popular ones. And you go there, you'd have basically the way you would see it on Instagram. That's how we're going to design it to say, okay, this is the interaction. This is the logic behind when a user taps this card. For example, when the user is scrolling, do we play all 30 seconds of the video, or do we play the first 15 seconds? And if we say the first 15 seconds, why do we want to do that? And maybe the reasoning behind that would be we don't want to have the attention span of people generally is between 3 seconds to 8 seconds now. So if you play all 30 seconds of a video, maybe it's not useful. If they are really interested in that video, they will tap into it. So those are kind of the logic you're kind of thinking of. And then you're representing them in visually, like in a design. So you probably have exactly the way you see it on Instagram. You have it on your design tool, and then you can also prototype it for it to work the way it would work within Instagram. So yeah, that's basically what we would do. And eventually, as I mentioned before, sometimes companies will run that as an experiment to see if the hypothesis was right, and if it's validated by users' engagement. And if it's validated, then we're like, okay, this is good to ship. But if it isn't validated, we're like, okay, we need to stop this experiment and figure out why the experiment did not work. So a lot of problem solving.
Okay, that's so interesting. So what I'm hearing is that sometimes you come up with the hypothesis, data driven, or sometimes no data is just a thought, and then you try to test it out. So you map it out with one of your visual tools, whether it's Figma or Adobe XP, just to show so that everybody involved understands what the hypothesis is and what is going to be involved and like how long this test is going to be. And then you put it out there for a certain amount of time, and then people can see what's working based on the data. Are people more engaged? Are people scrolling by? Are people saying, no, this is pleasant, kind of thing? And then if it is engaging people more, which I think it's a very big data point for a place like Instagram, then we might keep it. But if it's not engaging people, okay, are there things we can tweak in this test? And then go from there. So that's really fascinating to me. And so what I'm hearing also is that almost in every aspect of our experience with Instagram, a product designer has been involved, whether it's like the scrolling, whether it's the way the pictures show up, whether it's the way the video, all of those things. So that's super interesting to think that there's so many people involved in just like how we're experiencing things. That's cool. In your opinion, how old do you think a child needs to be able to grasp even a little bit of this, like this whole idea of coming up with the hypotheses and testing it, or looking at data and testing things?
Yeah, I would say that as long as a child is old enough to understand the basics of, I'd say maybe ABC numbers, they can comprehend numbers, they can comprehend letters, then they can start. But of course, I think it's kind of like on a different level in terms of kind of drawing wireframes and mock-ups, because there are different aspects to product design. So there's the more or to UI UX design. What I talked about previously around data, around numbers, around experiments is more around product design. But in the real sense of UI UX design, you have less of the product portion of it. It's more around advocating for the users and then using those visual representations in our digital design tools to explain what we need to do to make the user's experience pleasurable. But then scaling it further down, we have the UI portion of it, where it's just kind of making mock-ups of what the solution could look like. I'm actually watering that down, like really down. So maybe someone might hear me. I'm like, what? That's not what UI design is about. But yeah, just for this illustration. So once a child can draw a sketch, then you can actually start prompting them around what a solution to a problem might look like. So you have, I do this design thinking exercise with teenagers where it's basically about problem solving. Design thinking we use design thinking methodology a lot in product design or UX design. However, design thinking applies to everything we do in life, right? You can use it for non-digital products as well. So you can just get them to start exercising their skills around design thinking, which kind of goes from having an idea and exploring that idea furthermore. So basically getting them to ask why, because a lot of solutions are not even formed in the tool itself. It's kind of formed by asking questions. So if I'm having a conversation with a user, I would ask, maybe you say, oh, I am frustrated with using this app, and I'm going to ask you why. Because yes, I understand you're frustrated, but I don't understand the reason why you're frustrated. And once I am able to ask you why more like 5 times, I would probably get to the deeper reason why you are frustrated. So it could probably be that the scrolling experience is infinite, and that feels like it's never going to end, and it's less pleasurable for you in that sense. So just that developing that curiosity. I know that kids are very curious humans. So if you're able to develop that curiosity, get them asking questions, not just saying, okay, this is the problem I have, but actually digging deeper into why that might be a problem to them. And then kind of going beyond that, what you can then do is like, okay, if you're having this problem, what digital solution can you create? So get them to verbalize it. They might not be able to put it down or as a wireframe or sketch it out, but they can verbalize, okay, maybe if I create this kind of digital product, it can do X and it can do Y. That's already problem solving, right? Then as they grow older, they can then begin to learn tools like, actually you can start with pen and paper. So as designers, we also do wireframes with pen and paper, and then from there they can go into using tools like Balsamic, which is kind of drag and drop for their wireframes, and then eventually learn to use Figma. So as long as they're able to comprehend basic knowledge, ABC 1 to 3, I'm sure they'll be able to kind of start with the foundation and then go from there.
I really like the idea that they can even start with just drawing in their notebooks. So just say, what is this? What do you want it to look like? Just draw in your notebook, and then we can replicate it in Balsamic or Figma, whichever one. So that's super cool. If they start thinking about learning all these tools like Balsamic or Figma or more of design thinking, are there some resources you'd recommend for them to go and learn more and I guess get better at using those tools?
I would say that the number one resource for learning Figma would be Figma. So Figma, if you go to, I think Figma resource library, just Google that. They have a resource library for people who want to start out in UI UX design. So from the foundations of design principle, then they kind of go into more complex topics like design systems. The kid might not need to learn about design systems at this point, but they can start with just learning what UI UX design is, what the principles of visual design is, because that would be the foundation they would then kind of build on later on. So Figma resource library is one. Figma also has a YouTube channel, so that's also good because I feel like once you're able to see what you're doing visually, then you can actually learn what you need to do. I'll say those two would be a good starting point. I didn't know of any other like resource that is kind of catered to kids specifically, but I know that Figma resource is very basic, and as long as they're able to read and understand, comprehend, then they should be able to get like the central thinking behind that.
That makes sense. Yeah. So for parents who want to support their children, maybe they've seen that their children really enjoy this. But learning something can be frustrating. What are some ways that parents can support their kids so that they don't feel like, oh, I'm not smart enough, that's why I don't get it, or they don't give, so that the kids don't give up before they even get the opportunity to actually acquire these skills?
I'd say maybe just kind of coming up with a roadmap for the kids would be helpful. And now we have AI, we have ChatGPT. You can go into ChatGPT and kind of set your constraints and the requirements. These are, my kid is this years old. I want this person to learn A to Z for this time span. Go into ChatGPT, it will actually come up with a good learning plan for you. I'd say that's the first thing. But also, like in addition to that, you might also need to walk them through some of the tools, because they, like, as an older person, you might be able to comprehend some of the tutorials better. So you might actually need to do some learning as your kids they learn, right? So like if they're stuck in certain places, you can be like, okay, this is how you do it, or this is what the tutorial says. How do you replicate it on your own version of what you're doing? So that's one. So you need to be hands-on with them. And then I think maybe lastly would be, of course, you need to support them financially, because it would require, although I'd say mostly you can learn for free because there are a lot of free resources. However, those free resources will only take you as far, especially when you are a kid or you are a teenager.
That makes lots of sense. And even if it's free for now, at some point you're going to need to pay. So it's good for you to know how to invest in this opportunity. So that makes sense. So I'm also a really big believer in that the world is so, it's like a local global village, so we think, okay, we're just preparing for this, but then opportunities can arise somewhere else. So I'm saying that to say, for this kind of global opportunity where you might be in Canada now, but you might decide you want to work in the US, or you're in Nigeria, you want to work in Germany, or different places like that. How do you feel like UX design or product design or UI design can set a child up for success for global opportunities?
So the great thing about UI UX design is that it is first of all, let me take that back. The great thing about the world we live in right now is that it's a global village, right? And beyond that, we are I'll say remote first. In a lot of companies are remote first. So you have you can find a UX designer living in Canada working in the US, or someone living in Europe working in the US, right? So a good example is myself. My second job was a fully remote job. I was living in Nigeria, but the company I was working for, their head office was based in Ivory Coast, and their main operations was in France. So, and we had people working from all over the world. So that's basically the situation or the setup we have right now, where most companies are fully remote or maybe hybrid in some cases, and as such you can work anywhere in the world. So it's a very good opportunity to actually work anywhere you want, or in any country you want. It might not be very common maybe in future, because I don't know why we're going back to the office, but yeah, most tech companies now realize that they can save money by actually being fully remote. So they actually support that a lot.
Okay, so for this kind of role, is this something where people need to get some kind of certification? So, for example, if you're like a pharmacist or a doctor or a lawyer, you need to get recertified in every different country that you're practicing. So, is this something where you could just get one certification and you're fine, or you don't even need a certification? What does that process look like?
Okay, so time has changed, and with time, things have changed. And I say this to kind of set the context for what I'm going to say. So when I started my career in UX design, I was in terms of like my background, I had 4 years in academia and then 7 years in um, as an entrepreneur, fashion designer, right? And I took a 3 months, 3 to 6 months boot camp, and I did a lot of personal learning. And after that, I applied for a job and I got it, right? So I would say that it is pretty dynamic in the sense that you don't need to actually have a particular degree to actually work in the field of UX design. Because, for example, I studied international studies and diplomacy, pretty unrelated from or related to what I do currently as a UI UX design, at least on the high level. But you have some relations somewhere, some way. And that was like easy for me to pivot, right? However, the world has changed in the sense that now we have the economic situation where a lot of companies are laying off. So you have a lot of people in the job market and it's quite competitive. And because of that, you then kind of need to do everything that you can to position yourself for the best jobs. And in order to do that, some people have advised that you might consider taking a having a degree in HCI. So actually, there's a degree called Human Computer Interaction, where that you can it's offered in universities as undergrad or postgraduate certificates and or degrees rather. And you can do those because those are kind of very directly related to what you would do as a product designer. So if you want to take that on, right away, then you can do that. However, you can also study things like psychology, because psychology is very closely related with product design. You can study marketing, and they would also find like there's also a place for all those other degrees within the space of product design. As I mentioned before, it is multidisciplinary. So, but however, if you have those directly connected degrees, then your transition or you kind of getting a job might be easier. I say might because you don't know, so yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that makes so much sense. So if you have like a marketing degree or even maybe even customer success, because you talk with the customer, so you know what frustrates them. Or like you said, psychology, it can be really helpful because you're trying to help people have that pleasurable experience. And I really like that you use that phrase because I know when I use a platform that is frustrating, I don't want to come back, and I don't care how much the platform is promising me to make money or whatever. I'm like, I don't want to come back. This experience is not good. So that idea of a pleasurable experience is really, really powerful to me. So I'm just imagining. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add that, like, beyond the degrees, there are also boot camps. So if you have a non-traditional path like mine, where your direct degree was in like HCI, then you can actually take a boot camp where you would learn the foundational things that you need to actually start out as a UI designer. There are also people who are self-taught. I know of a lot of people who did not go to any boot camp, but they'll learn on their own. So you have courses on Coursera. So that's something maybe a parent can also support their child to do, which is the Google UX course. It's slightly more complex, so it's probably someone who is a teenager that might be able to kind of comprehend the concepts, but that's one way they can actually support their child. And in terms of like resources, it's paid, but then there are also opportunities to get it for free if you apply for a bursary if you are unable to afford it. So it's kind of pretty accessible to a lot of people. So I just wanted to add that beyond like the degrees, there's also the boot camp route or self-taught route. So yeah.
That's so good to know. Self-taught, boot camp, there's so many opportunities. So that's good to know. I'm just imagining that someone listening or watching this would be saying to themselves, oh my goodness, this sounds so amazing. Since it's multidisciplinary, I feel like it can either be a foundation for somebody or it can be like a destination based on wherever their experience has taken them so far. But they might have more questions to ask. They might want to connect with you. So what is the best way for them to connect with you with, extra questions or to just learn more because you share a lot of free resources?
So I'll say my number one platform would be YouTube. On YouTube, my name is the Nook. So THENOOK with Grace Mary. So GRACE-MERY. And on other platforms, that's the same name, so you can find me on TikTok and also Instagram. If you drop a comment on my YouTube video, I would answer all questions that I have there. Also, if you go to my DM on TikTok or LinkedIn, sorry, I said LinkedIn, TikTok or Instagram, then you can also send me a message, and fingers crossed you would get a response. So yeah.
I love the fingers crossed.
Yeah,
But
because
yeah.
I was going to say a lot of conversation get lost in spam on like TikTok and Instagram. So, but YouTube for sure, I see those. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, we'll put all those links in the show notes to make sure that people have access to it. So yeah, I think this has been super, super helpful, super, super informative. I learned a lot about UI, UX, product design. And so I just want to say thank you so much for answering all these questions. Thank you for being a resource to parents, to people who want to transition. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure actually just having this conversation. I love talking about product design, so the pleasure is all mine.